Hey, welcome back, everybody. I think I'm looking in a mirror and seeing my younger self because my guest today is a improviser, and actually he's based out of Columbus, Ohio. And we were talking beforehand. I haven't met him. He's a lot younger guy than I am, but you would have thought that it would take me to come to Oklahoma, to the state of Oklahoma here in Stillwater to have a conversation with a person who probably lived maybe about 10, 15 minutes away from me before I moved. And first and foremost, Nathan, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to spend some time with me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So I get an email from Nathan. I believe that's how it came on LinkedIn. And he goes, I went to an NSA meeting and I told him what I did. And they go, you got to talk to Pete. You got to talk to Pete Margaritis. You got to talk to Pete Margaritis. And for those of you at NSA Ohio, thank you very much. I'm glad you pointed him in my direction. So we've had a chance to kind of get to know each other and catch up a little bit. And they say it's wasted on the old. I mean, it's wasted on the youth. He's a younger guy, but he's got this improv thing down, and I want to find out how he connected those dots over the years. So first, how did you get started in the world of improv?
Yeah, well, at NSA Ohio, your legacy definitely lives on.
Well, that could be good or bad. We'll just leave it good for now.
Yeah, so how did I get started in the world of improv? So I did some theater when I was in high school, and I had heard of improv, but I hadn't really seen it. I didn't really know anything about it. Then I went to Ohio State and I saw these two improv groups perform. And seeing them perform, just seeing how fast their brains worked and seemed to act as one on stage, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So I went out, auditioned for these two groups, and honestly, I did incredibly well and blew everybody else out of the water. Honestly, I was like, man, I'm so good at this. So then I get a call later that night. Obviously, the congratulations, you're in the group call. And it seemed that I was the only person that thought I did well. So I didn't get into either group. Didn't get into either group. But knowing this was something I wanted to do, took a step back and started taking some improv classes. Now, at this point, a lot of the people in the improv groups I was auditioning for had never taken a full improv class. They just auditioned, happened to be really good at it, and they got in the group. So now I go back and I'm now a trained improviser, and I audition again. And this time it really pays off because the exact same thing happens. Still cannot get into these groups. In total, I auditioned 7 times before I got into an improv group.
Okay.
But yeah, when I got into those improv groups and through the 7 auditions, I realized improv's a learnable skill. So it's something that can be picked up and developed. I didn't deserve to get into the improv groups the first 6 times. I wasn't good enough yet. And then I also realized that as I improved on stage, I improved off stage as well. As I became a better improviser, I became a better communicator, better entrepreneur, and even a better team member. And then I started the company that I have now, Green Light Improv.
So before you go forward, let's go back and give some kudos. Where did you get your improv training from? Was it in Columbus?
Yeah, so I first started in Columbus and did a couple classes around here. And then I went to New York, had like sort of like a conservatory style training with Armando Diaz, who has the form The Armando.
Well, if you got a form named after you, you must be really good.
It's a great name. Great name, very creative name. Yeah, and the Armando Diaz Experience is like the longest running improv show in Chicago. So he broke down improv to a level that like I had never had broken down before. The first class, if I remember this right, the first class, we did the first line. And then the second class, we did first line, second line. and then we added one line at a time, and it was helpful to break down the beginning of scenes to that level for me.
So wait, you mentioned New York and you mentioned Chicago. So Armando was in New York.
Armando is in New York, but he got his start,
Okay.
or at least lived in Chicago for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you know if he was part of the Second City group in Chicago?
I know he was in UCB, or at least I think he was employed by UCB.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not sure where he performed.
All right. So you go through this process, you get into a troupe, and you're performing in front of live audiences. And like I said before, I performed in front of live audiences from a training perspective, looking at from a business improv approach versus a theatrical approach. And you've got the acting background. How was that? I mean, because you're really kind of going without a net to some degree.
Yeah, I find performing improv, the very first couple times, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking. But right after that, and at this point, I feel so comfortable on a stage without a script, and even far more comfortable than if I have a script. Because if I don't have a script, I can trust my own abilities, trust the team that I have on stage. But if I have one, then there's something I need to remember and focus on. And not that I'm very uncomfortable with that, but I'm far more comfortable performing improv now. It feels very freeing.
I agree. It's very freeing. I'm not really good with the script anyhow. But I will, in preparation for stuff, I'll write things out and what I want to, but more from trying to teach it from a business improv approach. But then metaphorically, when I walk into the room, I wad up that, throw it away, and I play off the audience. And that's what you guys do. You play off the audience as well, and create those scenes based off of the audience, where if you're following a script, there's no place in there that says, check with the audience. What do they think?
Yeah, I actually talk about how performing improv is like the perfect mode to understand how like new businesses are created. Because when we are performing improv, we're in a high stakes scenario. We're creating something new, and we have to talk to our customers. So often people think that when you go on stage, for improv, you go on stage and you start telling jokes.
Right.
But what tends to happen with beginning improvisers is you go on stage, you tell a joke, and then two things happen. First, everyone knows that you tried to tell a joke and that it didn't land.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is everyone has to sit in that uncomfortable silence, knowing that you told a joke. And so we have to go through this process of like hearing the audience and just putting a little bit of like, oh, let's try this out. Oh, they laughed a little on that. Let's double down on this. And I find that one of the reasons you have to be so present in improv comedy and why it's so freeing is because you have to be in tune with your scene partner, but also in tune and listening to the audience throughout the whole performance.
Because it's all about the audience. And when you can make the audience the first person and me the second person, that frees you up to heighten those areas of improv when you're up performing or teaching or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, the audience holds you accountable for the show.
Right.
And so, yeah, I totally agree.
So when did this big aha moment happen as you're doing improv from a theatrical perspective? You're on stage, you're getting laughs. You guys are getting more popular. What was it that went, like you said, wait, I could use this in sales training. This is, that active listening aspect of it, the listening to understand. Those are much more than just being funny. Those are actual leadership tools.
Yeah, I think that it came from a couple of the classes I took, and I had heard that improv applied to business was a thing. Um, but I think it was more that I noticed in myself through taking all of these classes that I improved in my communication skills, teamwork, etc. Um, and then I can tell you the exact point when I decided, wow, I should start this company.
Okay.
And that was, I was working at a venture studio, which is essentially where corporations will outsource much of their innovation and basically give them money and say, go create a startup for us.
Mhm.
So I was working in this, and most of the time they employ entrepreneurs who now want something a little bit more secure. They have a salary, stuff like that. So I was sitting there and I gave an opinion on something that we were talking about, and someone turned to me and said, Nathan, what do you know? You haven't even started a company before. And I went, I don't think that was the nicest way to say it, but I think that you're onto something. So I think like a week later, I filed Green Light Improv. So um, it was in part just someone saying, "Hey, you should do something." Um, but before that, I had the idea. It was just taking the leap is scary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. So when I moved out here to Oklahoma, I was packing up a bunch of stuff and I came across some of my old flyers, my old brochures, packets of stuff, and I went, wow, I've learned a lot since then.
Yeah.
And I think the part that really and and I think you're beginning to see it, that this is a thing. It is a thing in the business world, and it's becoming more of a thing. Because my audience typically are accountants. They're the best communicators in the world. That's sarcasm because that's a
Great.
challenge.
They're they're very good at communicating, maybe through spreadsheets and P&Ls.
Right. And actually communicating in a foreign language, and just the ability to get them to think that they are performing and speaking in a foreign language, get them to think about other ways of communication and how we can come together, because it's about connecting. And a lot of the older accounts will go, well, I still have my clients. I said, well, the reason why you still have your clients is because you're trustworthy. They trust you. They don't understand you, but they trust you. And that's only half the equation.
Yeah.
And just teach them basic improv principles, especially about active listening, listening to understand versus listening to respond. They get this almost this oh kind of Scooby-Doo kind of thing.
Yeah.
You run into stuff similar like that when you're doing this?
Yeah, there's something I think that's interesting too, that very often improvisers are very well versed in pop culture, because when they are performing, you have to be aware of what's going on in the
Yeah.
world, so that you know what buttons you can possibly push or what buttons to very much avoid. Um, So yeah, I think it's interesting to take this approach of simplifying the message. And that's one thing I've talked about when I've coached startups when they're about to present their idea. And I always say, like, no matter how complicated what you are pitching is, because so often it's like radical technology change.
Yeah.
I always say, like, the people you're pitching to very often will not have any idea about this industry. And you want to convince them. So the best test to use is find like a middle schooler, explain it to them, and if they understand it, you're in. You got it.
Okay, so you just gave me this huge aha moment
Yeah.
about understanding pop culture. And I just flashed back to the last the fall semester and now here in the spring semester, I'm using references like Hogan's Heroes. I mean, and Nathan's going, what the hell's what's a Hogan's Hero? Or
Never.
or the Three Stooges, or and I'm going, I'm sorry, I'm just the old guy. I'm like going, okay, how did I get into that rut? And then so I do play some music in the class to kind of, it's accounting to kind of wake them up. And my undergrad TAs are going, do you know Swifty? I know what a Swifter is, but I don't know what a Swifty is. You never heard of Taylor Swift? I've heard of her, but she goes by Swifty. And I'm going, well, you could have led with Taylor Swift first and hit me with the Swift. Well, this is how we talk. And I'm going, when you just said that, I went, oh my God, that's why I'm not in touch with my students. I need to use their references more than mine. And I completely got away from that. And I won't anymore.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that comes from just being in the environment. Like, I'm on the board and I facilitate this high school leadership conference in Columbus. It's like a week-long program. And this past year was the first year that they would say things and I'd go, I can't even guess what that means. So please help me out. But it's interesting, just like even being with them for a week, at the end of the week, maybe halfway through the week, you get it.
Yeah.
And the best mode to understand the music is just turn on the USA Top 50.
Is that, is that like, is that an AM or FM?
I actually, growing up, here's a fun fact. Growing up, FM was, much better.
Yeah.
And every time I went to AM, it was just static noises.
Yeah.
So I remember talking to my parents going, why do we have this? This first one seems totally useless. It's so bad that it doesn't seem it can transmit anything.
Right.
And now I learn.
I would listen to AM radio. I'm a big Cincinnati Reds fan. So I'd get 700 WLW, and you could pick it up. You could pick it up in Columbus at times. The wind's blowing right, and listen to a baseball game. And then MLB came out where you can basically listen to it at FM and high def. And I haven't been back to AM since.
Yeah. It's sort of it seems like the same thing as people now talking about like, oh, you have cable? Interesting. Why?
Why? Yeah. Why aren't you streaming?
Yeah, like, YouTube TV, like you can pretty much watch all this.
To your point. So I've got, I keep saying I got to take it back. I got cable put in, and then I went, okay, this is not really what I want. So I started streaming YouTube TV and love it. Got it. Why do I still have cable? Why do I still have cable?
And some people's answer to that is because it's cheaper to have cable with a home phone. And I'm like, first of all, there's no way that's true.
No.
And also, why have a home phone?
Why have a home phone? That's right. And the other aspect of it is well, so if I unbundle my cable from my Wi-Fi, what will that do to my Wi-Fi price? Will it exceed what I got the bundle with? Do I save this just in case? I don't know. But we digress. But we digress. So you've been doing this for 4.5, 5 years?
Yeah. I started this company when I was, I believe, end of my junior year at Ohio State.
Okay.
So yeah, we're going on 5 years now.
Okay. And if you could talk to Nathan 5 years ago, now, what you've learned now, what would you tell the young Nathan that you've learned now that you wish you knew then?
I think that one thing I did that I learned very quickly was not going to work is that I saw a bunch of other companies that were doing corporate work.
Mhm.
They were doing work with businesses with applied improv. And I thought that was really the only option. So I went out and tried to get a lot of corporate work. And everyone told me in the entrepreneurship circles at the university that I should play my student card and say, I'm a student entrepreneur. And what I found was that corporations were a little wary of hiring a college student to lead 100 members of their team at a conference. But I found that over time, they were higher ed groups were comfortable bringing me in.
Yeah.
So I would say, you can test you can and should test the waters for a variety of industries. Especially in college, I didn't have a lot of experience in any industry yet.
Right.
So I think I should have tested all of the waters, but once you find one that works, just double down on that for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like find your lane. Spend time trying to figure out what lane you want to be in. And when you find that lane, stay in that lane. And I don't know, some people say, so if you stay in the lane, but I get an offer over here and I get an offer over outside the lane, do I take it or not?
Yeah, I would say the answer is you can take it if you can do a really good job with it.
Right.
But I think there are definitely some things that you're offered that you're just like, I cannot do that well.
But wouldn't this be something that might make you take that chance, whether it's right or wrong? I've got a rent payment due. I've got a mortgage due. I've got bills to pay. So I'm turning down something over here. And that's a mindset of almost every entrepreneur, especially first starting out, versus do I say no, stay in my lane where I'm successful?
Yeah. And what I would say to that is, to me, the stay in your lane argument, it makes a lot of sense for your marketing materials.
Mhm.
But for example, if my marketing materials are directed towards higher ed and McDonald's comes to me and says, we want you to speak at our corporate event, I think that's something that we can talk about. we can talk through that. Now, obviously, if my marketing is directed at higher ed, McDonald's comes to me, I have to acknowledge that while I may be able to sell this client, I'm not sure that I can put the same amount of effort that I do in most higher ed workshops as I would in the McDonald's workshop and make them similar quality. So I need to spend much more time developing the McDonald's workshop because it is outside my lane.
Right.
But you can still take it, but just make sure that you put the work in to make it really good.
So I did ask you this, but is your degree in entrepreneurship out of Ohio State?
My degree's in marketing, and then
Okay.
I had a minor in theater.
In theater. Okay. All right. Well, that's the other aspect why you're successful in doing the world of improv, because that was the one thing I never did. When I was in school, I never had the desire to be in the theater department. I was a sports geek. If I could go back now and tell myself, a younger me, that would be the first thing I would have them do. I'd say, go get into theater, go into performing arts, learn that. And actually, I'm thinking about, we have a performing arts college at Oklahoma State University. I'm trying to figure out a way how to wiggle my way in there. And whether it's to offer some business improv course or something, something we'll look at next year. But yeah, that would be the one thing that I would look back on myself and say, okay, go do some theater for a while.
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah, I think it can be freeing to do a little bit of acting and performing. And not even in the way that I understand that it can be stressful for some people to get on stage and perform, even in the classes. But something that I find interesting about acting classes is that so much of it is warming up your body, warming up your voice, mentally getting prepared. And so you learn a little bit about how your body is structured and works and how you move through spaces.
Mhm.
Uh, so I almost think it's a nice way to understand yourself a little bit better, even if we put all of the benefits of performing on the side.
Yeah, yeah. And I have coached a number of people over the years, but I love working with another. I think you do the same thing, working with people on their presentation skills.
Mhm.
That's an area that I'm gonna go, I don't have the exact figures, but those who present at conferences or present technical materials, 95% of that population needs good presentation skills training.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even I find the biggest thing that I find myself asking other people and asking myself when I'm presenting is like, what is the main message we want to get across and who is in the room? Because I did 2 workshops 2 days ago, and they were very different audiences. One was hospital executives and one was MBA students. So like I the hospital executives wanted to learn about innovation practices,
Yeah.
and the MBA students were in an entrepreneurship class, last day of class, getting ready for a presentation. So those two groups need very different information, um, and they need it at a different way of speaking to them.
Mhm.
And so I find focusing, being very customer centric, or audience centric, just like an improv, is a very useful way to approach presentations.
Absolutely. And most people will not take most people who present won't think about the audience first. They'll think about what am I going to write to do this versus talking to the client, talking to the people, tell me about your audience, tell me what you guys do, and build it around that.
Yeah. I mean, one other thing is I even tend to ask about demographics of the room.
Mm.
And in part, it's for what you were talking about earlier. So my references don't fall.
Thanks for reminding.
Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, I've heard other presenters where they'll say they'll name drop a big rapper, and the audience is just not one that is likely to be very interested in rap, and or at least modern rap, like,
Mhm. Right.
and and yeah, they just sort of stare at them. And so as an improviser performer, we want to try to limit those
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will give myself a little bit of credit. I'm able to connect with my students because I don't come across as a professor and have a conversation with them. I never lecture to them,
Mhm.
and I'm very approachable. I just need to work on my references and not to seem like I'm like the hip professor, but to make those connections and use them in situations that gain their interest versus what's Grandpa up here talking about today.
Yeah. I not yet the grandpa thing.
Oh, there's Grandpa going off on that stuff again. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna put my headphones back on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even in business classes, it's useful to be able to, it's the same thing for that. Like it's it's very impactful if we can give examples to students that are very timely.
Mhm. Yeah,
So yeah, like talking about the crash of WeWork, for example. Um, or like that is a somewhat timely thing. It was like within 5 years.
oh yeah,
um, yeah, but it's something that's like still fresh and everyone is very interested to learn about, which is also why there are I think 3 documentaries on WeWork.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I do try to bring in current events out of the Wall Street Journal that I would think that they would, and Bath and Body Works was a big one that everybody could relate to, and no, not Bath and Body, it was Bed Bath and Beyond. And it was almost like Bed Bath and Beyond recovery from a bankruptcy. I think, as I said one day, and they all kind of got a kick out of that because they kind of got an idea of it. But yeah, it's that way of connecting with the audience. It's also if you're working with a technical audience, it's trying to get some of their lingo down. Not that you're going to be an engineer or whatever, but as long as you have some aspect of the language that they use and understand the translation of it, you can drop it into your stuff to make that connection with, like, oh, he kind of understands us.
Yeah. So 2 days ago in the hospital executives in that presentation, there were also a significant amount of doctors in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just heard a presentation on something very technical on a way to treat patients that was very impressive, but it was very technical on how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And my co-presenter had experience in healthcare, and he had heard of that before. And so when he started his talk, he said, we're going to be talking about innovation in the hospital systems, and we're going to even be bringing in improv. And then he mentioned the systems and the technical know-how of the last presenter. And I was very impressed at I think that gave some more credibility because it's like, oh, they understand our world. They understand what we're going through and this very technical thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even a way to gain credibility.
Yeah, it does. It brings a lot of credibility. So as we begin to wrap up, what does the rest of 2023 look like for you? Are you busy? Are you're continuing to grow in your business? What's your main niche? Is it hospitals? Is it? Kind of help me there.
Yeah. So we use improv comedy to teach entrepreneurship and communication skills.
Okay.
I would say the largest group that we work with is higher ed, and these tend to be entrepreneurship programs, communication programs, leadership programs outside of the classroom. So cohort-based programs.
Okay.
That's the biggest niche that we're in. But as I mentioned before, we sort of pull in from other areas too. What does the rest of this year look like? It looks like expanding the team. So we have 5 facilitators right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at expanding that and even using their niches to our advantage. For example, not to go too deep into the hospital example, but one of our facilitators is a nurse.
Okay.
So she's able to speak to that demographic far better than I am able to speak to it. So it's expanding into different areas and expanding our team and keeping spreading the word.
Okay. So when you talk about higher ed and you're talking about these cohort models, are you're doing stuff not more or less in the classroom, but you're doing it outside the classroom, like in a different venue, a different setting that they're able to come in and do the workshop? So is that like a after class kind of thing, or over the weekend, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so we're usually brought in by a program manager, a manager, something like that, of an existing program. And so a good example of this would be at Ohio State. We did work with the President's Buckeye Accelerator, where they give $300,000 across 6 startups. So preparing for their pitch, this is an extracurricular experience at Ohio State. They wanted to use improv to prepare for their presentations. So we came in, I think we did a 2-hour workshop. And it's on how to prepare for this presentation. So yeah, it tends to be not as part of a class, but part of a program at the university.
Okay, that's good to know. And I do know there's a lot of colleges and universities in the state of Ohio. I
Yeah.
think I think there's over 60, close to 70 state of Ohio. So that's a really good market to be in.
Yeah, it's awesome, and I find it to be a everyone talks to each other. So it's nice that it's a connected group, because the word of Green Light Improv can spread just a little bit faster at all these conferences that they go to.
Word of
And
mouth. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
he said, and I go to now.
Yeah, the word of mouth is the best referral service ever that one could have. It's also the cheapest one that you could have.
Yeah, I did try cold emails for a bit.
Uh-huh.
Did not work.
Thus
um,
the name cold.
yeah, and I had done successful cold email campaigns before, um, in different markets, and this one isn't the one. This one doesn't work as well as the others.
I think, and I shared with you, my biggest challenge with doing business improv in the corporate environment, higher education, whatever, it's getting them past the word improv. There's so many ways they take that. Obviously, funny, comedy. I'm not funny. I'm not trying to make you funny. You're funny yourself, but you can do that. Or I'm going to be embarrassed, or it's fearful, or there's no script, and there's a lot of excuses. And I actually saw a guy by the name of Izzy Giselle, I think is his last name is. He was an NSA member, and he did this improv workshop at one of the conferences. And he had everybody, he goes, I'm going to make this safe. I'm not calling everybody up on stage. We're just going to do this at the table. We're going to do these exercises at the table, and got everybody comfortable to what is actually happening. Then he said, now who would like to volunteer?
Mhm.
Versus people come in and say, I need volunteers. Everybody says, whoa, 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 I'm not sure what I'm getting into. So it's just giving that audience a comfort level and letting them have a level of trust, and then doing it on their own with somebody that they're not all the eyes on them. And then when you do get them up on stage, be prepared to bribe them.
Yeah, I bring mugs.
You bring mugs. I used to bring Amazon cards. I used to do that. And then I said, well, heck, I got books. I can bring books up there. And that was kind of a lure to get people to come up and do. But yeah, that's always been I think the biggest challenge is understanding what the word improv means. And it's not all the time about being funny.
Yeah, and I think people are catching on to the idea faster now than they did when I started Greenlight 4 years ago. But I would say, yes, it is definitely still a challenge. And I, just like what you said, I also approached that right at the beginning of the session. That's like, we are not going to make you come up here and say your word is potato and give you half an hour, because that is terrifying. Even for some trained improvisers, that's terrifying. So yeah, it's like everything's opt-in. You don't have to, like, if you choose not to participate, that's okay. All we ask is that you are the biggest cheerleader for everyone that can or wants to participate.
Yeah.
And yeah, I find it is dramatic, the experience at the very beginning of the workshop, where sometimes almost everyone's on their phone staring at their feet.
Yeah.
At the end, when they're loosened up, they're having fun.
Yeah.
And they learn something.
And that's the key. Let's have fun. Let's laugh. Let's learn something. So it's been a pleasure meeting you. 2, thank you for taking time. 3, I will be in Columbus in June. And I'm going to be there for probably 2 or some odd weeks. My son's birthday's on the 9th, and he's getting married on the 15th. So at some point when I'm in there, I'll give you advance notice. We're going to lunch. I want to learn more about what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I wish I was your age, starting all over again, doing this now. But it's very exciting to meet you. And I appreciate those at NSA Ohio for pointing you in my direction.
Yeah, I would love to grab lunch. I'll be there. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it.